so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the reflection and extension of you who will be here each Wednesday interviewing a different consciousness changemaker. And on the other 4 weekdays, leading the way to ensure that your perspective is consistently expanded, your vibration is constantly elevated, and your heart is overflowing and full. And you guys have heard me say that if I ever run ads on this show, it will only be with a company that I fully support because I believe their intention is to make a positive difference in the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that day has arrived and that this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads, on this week's powwow episode, I am very, very excited to have Matt Kahn here with me on the show. Matt is a spiritual teacher, empathic healer, best-selling author who has garnered quite a following with his profoundly insightful and empowering perspectives on the ultimate nature of reality that have really struck a massive chord among truth seekers all across the world. Been looking forward to this for quite some time. Matt, thank you. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you for stopping by.
Well, thanks for having me. It's truly an honor to be here with you, Brandon.
All right. Well, let's dive right in. I'm going to be completely, utterly predictable. I always start with the same question and end with the same question. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
My passion is serving the hearts of all. I truly, the work that I do, even though it's an expression of God-given intuitive abilities that I've developed over the years, what allows me to do what I do and to do it to the depth that I do it is because I truly love serving humanity. I love serving the evolution of every heart. And in my experience, the evolution and well-being of every soul is as important to me as any relative or member of my family.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Well, let's get a little background into that before we dive in. You have a great new book that's just about to be released, and I want to really dig in and get some Cliff Notes or some Matt Notes directly from the source. But before we do, maybe you could give us a little background. I love stories. I love good stories. And we're going to touch on a synchronistic story or something to that effect, positive paranormal story, maybe at the end of this episode. But to start out, I really like to get a feel for how did you end up on this unique path? Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, of course. So throughout my life, from a very early age, I had experienced what I now call vibrational codependency. And what that is, which affects so many of us around the world, is when you are not able to decipher the difference between your emotions and the feelings of others. And in fact, from a very young age, my confusion was I could feel the emotions and unresolved emotional debris of other people, and I thought that was actually their opinion of me. So I kind of walked around my childhood thinking no one really liked me and would constantly work to cheer people up because only when they were happy did I feel accepted by them. And so that was quite mysterious and confusing and rather painful. And as this was occurring, from a very early age, I think I may have been 8 years old, I had a really vivid experience where I went to sleep one night and I thought I was dreaming. And I found myself in the most amazing garden where the colors and hues of the garden and the flowers of this garden were so vibrant, were so rich that it was literally overflowing with the vibration of love. And I remember not knowing where I was, but I felt totally safe to be there, which for me was a very different experience. Especially as a kid who was so sensitive like I was basically afraid of everything. So here I was held in this energy of love that I'd never known before. And I saw this field of flowers that were as tall as my waist. And I felt my 8-year-old body moving through the field of waist-high flowers. Simultaneously, I also realized I was hovering above the flowers watching myself. And I couldn't explain this, but the love was so intoxicating, it almost didn't matter. And as I was floating above the field of flowers, I saw in front of me a being floating above the flowers as well, with a white robe, dark hair, and a beard. And I didn't know who the being was, but there was a deep sense of kinship and familiarity. And as I looked at this being, I started automatically floating towards the being. When I got about 5 feet from this being, it was just this pure white light flowing out of their eyes. And for some reason in that moment, what I thought of like in really scary horror films where people kind of roll their eyes up into their head. And that thought broke the state of the experience. I then fell through the garden. I fell through the sky. And only when I crashed back into my body did I realize I had left it. And as I woke up sweating and shaking, I saw that same being from the garden in my doorway outlined in this chalky white energy. And as I looked and he motioned me towards him, he disappeared. And it was from that moment that I was put on a spiritual path. I remember telling my friend about this vivid experience, and I was in his living room and they had a painting of Jesus on the wall. And I said, that's the guy I met. And my friend laughed and said, Matt, you didn't meet Jesus. And I said, no, I don't know. Because I didn't know Jesus. I was raised Jewish. I said, I don't know who he is, but that's who I met. And it was from that experience where I had this peripheral sense of angels and guides walking with me. And I would know things like, well, these are my angels. And I wouldn't even know how I would know that. I just all of a sudden would have these random moments of confident knowing that just kind of came out of nowhere, but it felt more true and more right than anything I had ever learned in a book. And as I started trusting this and going through adolescence, it was about in my mid-20s where the angels and guides that I'd felt around me started speaking to me. And every day I'd meet a different guide. I'd sit in my bedroom, have conversations about the universe, and it would be attuning my intuitive abilities and really refining my abilities in a really profound way. And then one day I'm in a grocery store, and instead of these guides just talking to me like they did, they would deliver me a message and say, can you deliver this message to the person over there in the produce aisle? And the feeling was, if I don't deliver this message, I'm going to have a heart attack. And so I'd have to go over to someone and say, look, you don't know me, but I'm being instructed to tell you X, Y, Z. And they would have a huge epiphany. It would be a huge healing. I have no idea what I just did, but it totally worked and it helped that person. And I was simply guided throughout my life to keep doing this. And then I was guided into a spiritual bookstore, was guided to take a psychic development class. And on the third week of the class, they asked me to teach it. And I had no idea what was going on, but I was just following the insights that whatever I was instructed to do, I would just do it. And when I would do it, the most miraculous things would unfold. And it's literally as if my life path, a path I never knew existed, a path I never even knew I would be a part of, has literally unfolded around me. And all I've done is just trusted the gut instincts that come to me almost like the silence of wind. And it's been the most extraordinary and exhilarating and, fulfilling journey of my entire life. But it's literally been a lifelong journey of just trusting a mysterious instinct that for me comes to me nearly in every breath.
Wow, that's quite powerful. And you know, Matt, what instantly comes to mind as you tell me that is the guy or gal out there who's listening and thinking, well, lucky for Matt, he had this incredible experience to sort of lead him on his path. Well, I'm not getting these sorts of messages and these urgings to, you know, follow anything. And maybe that's why my life isn't as miraculous and exciting and beautiful as his. And I know to some degree you probably, I'm speculating that you believe that we're all intuitive and we all have the ability to do this. Just like we all have the ability to shoot a basket, but we're not all meant to necessarily be LeBron James, right? Yeah. So what do you say to that person who, you know, is hearing this and thinking, wow, why can't I have that?
It's a very interesting phenomenon. You know, you made a great analogy with the LeBron James analogy. We all have these abilities. All the abilities I have is within every human being, and every human being is at a different stage of their development of really honing these abilities. And one day I was thinking to myself, God, how come it seems like this is happening for me and it doesn't happen for other people? And then the universe gave me a vision. And what I saw is that we all know, or we have at least heard of the idea of incarnations, you know, where we are born in this lifetime as this name, as this character with roles and goals and ambitions, and maybe we've had past lives and future lives. But there's something that I was taught that's called meta-incarnation. And what that adds to the conversation is that meta-incarnation is a word that refers to this is not the first time that you have actually incarnated into this particular body and with this particular name. So for example, I'm experiencing life as Matt Kahn, and my intuition is always telling me what I need to do and where I need to go. And what if what intuition actually is that I've incarnated and played Matt Kahn in so many different timelines that what we call intuition is just my soul reminding me of the difference I came to make in this particular timeline. And so for those of us who are watching someone in my position and saying, how come I'm not doing that? It's because the awareness of someone like me who is demonstrating these abilities or serving so many people on a high level, the more aware you are of someone demonstrating that, it's almost like a sneak preview of the universe saying you're being prepared to play this role in another lifetime. Now, it doesn't have to be a different, future lifetime. It could be that at the end of this lifetime, you're going to actually live the same life again, but from a different timeline perspective. And a lot of the people who see and resonate with the work that I'm doing, it's because I'm actually preparing their soul for the next time around to start stepping into playing the kind of role that I'm demonstrating right now. So literally, everyone gets a turn, everyone gets an opportunity to shine, and the people who are aware of the things that I demonstrate, or even if we took it to the analogy of the person who wishes they were LeBron James, or the person that wishes they were the American Idol, they themselves are only aspiring towards the very thing they're already being prepared to have.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really powerful, insightful perspective. And it makes me think a little bit of, are you familiar with the short story, The Egg? Have you read this or seen they actually made it, a few people made it into a short film?
I haven't actually.
Well, I think you would really enjoy it, and it's about 10 minutes or so. You can, if you Google The Egg short story on YouTube, you pull up or read it either way. But basically, it just shows this guy, and he dies, and then basically he finds out it's only him, and and then it's him and God, and they say, well, we're the only ones here, and you are experiencing. It's all you. There were no others the whole time. And then, basically you're going to come back, and this time you're going to live as a Chinese woman in the 1400s. And, she basically goes through this whole thing, and he starts questioning her. He goes, hold on. So I was Hitler and all the people that he killed. So I was, and he basically comes to the realization, and the end of it is, after you've been everyone and everything, then you'll have grown enough to be born. Like, that's sort of the beginning. And I find that such a powerful way to think about this whole multiple timeline and multiple, versions, and how we interact with all these other versions of ourselves. So the way I kind of envision it is, if we split off from source at some point, and then we take on, I'm playing the avatar, the character that is Brandon Beecham in this particular role. But at some other point, I've maybe stepped into the avatar that is Matt Kahn. I've stepped into the avatar that is everyone else. And I think that's such a fascinating, way to just look at it. And as someone who is so, tapped in on this level, I'm curious what your thoughts are on how the structure is really structured.
Well, it's interesting because, and I just go by what drops into my intuition as we're speaking. What's interesting is, a lot of times people will talk about reality and they'll call it the dream state, and they'll give all these terms to it. Like there's awakening and you're awakening out of the dream state. But what if this lifetime, what if the reason why some of it's so painful, what if the hint of life being a dream is that this lifetime that we're in is actually a practice round? What if this is actually a training ground, just as much as when maybe you were taught to drive a car? Like when my father taught me to drive a car, he took me to a parking lot and I got to drive a car around an empty parking lot, and I got to work it out before I got into traffic. And so what if what's waiting us on the other side when we cross over is not what we call the afterlife, but actually the beginning of life, and this dream is actually just our fully present multi-sensory training ground where we practice making choices based on certain influences at certain perspectives of consciousness to refine and perfect our ability to act upon the choices that align with the highest frequency and vibrations. And as we master that ability as co-creators, what if the afterlife is actually the real performance?
Yeah, that's quite, that sinks in extra deep, because my brother just bought this new Oculus Rift, self-contained mask today, where now you don't have to have it on a computer. It's just, the mask itself, and it's all a self-contained unit, and it just came in the mail to him. And so I was playing with it a little bit earlier, and I'm thinking, wow, this is so much like this reality that we're already in, just a lot higher resolution here for now.
Well, it absolutely. And so, wouldn't it be funny to kind of just contemplate, what if the most vivid Oculus mask of virtual reality is the name you've been given?
Right. Exactly. I want to dive in a little bit. That's quite the start. We went right in the deep end of the pool, and I know your previous best-selling book, Whatever Arises, love that. I just love that title in general, and it's something I've used that quote so many times since originally becoming aware of the book. And now you have a book that is coming out in another few weeks, right?
Absolutely. Everything is Here to Help You comes out officially June 5th, I believe, although it's available for pre-order right now everywhere.
Right. And, I have no doubt it will be absolutely epic. And you actually sent a copy, and I skimmed through, have not read it all. I have, so what's great about this is I can get the Matt notes live and direct, but I did also go and watch one of your videos where titled Everything is Here to Help You, if I recall. And so I'm assuming there's a lot of the same subject matter. Seemed like there's some other stuff in the book as well. But so some of the things that just really jumped out at me, I'd like to just kind of, pick your brain on. Sure. One of the things in the video that jumped out, you talked about, and some of it really struck a chord with me personally, and that is, you talked about inferiority that's rampant in the spiritual community. People striving not to make it about themselves. And I really liked that. Really struck a chord with me, because it's something that I've really, sought to do in a sense with, for example, this show isn't the Brandon Beecham show. It's Positive Head. It's not just about me. And yet you made a very interesting point that maybe this could be problematic to some degree, or a perspective on it that I hadn't really thought of. So maybe you could share a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, in my experience, inferiority is what happens when spiritual evolution is combined with a lack of emotional intimacy. So when we are very spiritually evolved or interested in spiritual growth, but we have a lot of repressed emotions, or we're not as emotionally intimate, when we have this disproportionate relationship between those two things, we tend to be, very humble on a very beautiful level, humble, but underneath there's this inferior insecurity where it's almost like, on the surface, yes, please God, let me serve your highest will. But it's almost like our sainthood and our servitude is nearly apologizing for existing. And so what I find to be, in many cases, we call it the middle way, which is not too far to the left, not too far to the right. Yes, obviously be humble, be heart-centered, be loving, be compassionate, be grateful. But at the same time, let us equally occupy space within our body that says, I exist, I'm here for a reason, I have a purpose, and I need not apologize for who I am and the uniqueness that I express. And whether I seem to be too much for myself or other people, for whatever period of time that happens, I am here living out the highest fulfillment and destiny of divine will just by being myself. And so one of the most interesting facets of spiritual mastery is, how do we become so energetically sensitive and embody a healthy amount of confidence without becoming insecure and inferior along the way? And of course, it's through the healing of our heart, through as the main basis of my teachings. And of course, through all the brand new teachings included in the book, Everything is Here to Help You, I show people step by step through processes and practices and so many teachings that, even though there's a YouTube video called Everything is Here to Help You, most of that video is not in my book. I sat down to write my book thinking I was going to kind of take that video and write around it. And I sat down and I would write chapter after chapter. And I kid you not, every time I was done, I would stand up and I would scream because I was writing things I'd never heard before. And I was putting it in a way where I felt in every fiber of my being, I am capturing lightning in a bottle. The universe has chosen me to bring through the most incredible book I have ever experienced. And I would say that even if I hadn't read it. So for me, this book is an opportunity for spiritual beings to stop apologizing for existing, to shift out of the confines of ego and into the illuminated presence of our soul, but to make that shift in the most loving and heart-centered way so that we can stop apologizing and start living the life that we were born to live.
Wow. Yeah, that's super powerful. And, that's something here as I look at sort of some of my notes and things that really jumped out from watching that video. And then also the book, it's like they're sort of different topics. So, but they're all so good. So, so I'm going to try and cram in as much of it as we can here. And one of the other things that really jumped out, and by the way, thank you for that. I definitely feel like that's something that I've really tried to find my path with, is bringing humility, but also, like you said, not owning it as well. It's both are important. Right. And I think maybe because as a child, it was like, and within my family, it's like I've heard a lot about my ego or, being so overly confident. So it's like almost as I approached this work, it was like, okay, it's almost like overcompensating, right? Mm-hmm. And so as you said, the middle ground, like a healthy balance, as with all things, it makes a whole lot of sense.
Well, and sometimes in our family, not all the times. I mean, sometimes you're raised in a family where you're learning about ego because you're being raised by a more conscious parent, and they're just teaching you about consciousness and conduct and alignment of choices and values, which are all very important things to learn as being human beings. I mean, spiritual evolution cannot disqualify us from being thoughtful human beings. And I know, sometimes I know that gets overlooked quite easily. So let it be known as a cosmic rule of thumb that self-realization and enlightenment does not disqualify the fact of being a nice, well-adjusted human being. But oftentimes in families, what happens is that the ego of a parent feels subconsciously intimidated by the power and light and uniqueness of their child. And if that child is radiating a presence that is bigger than the disempowerment of the parent. It's almost the parent trying to rein in the child by saying, hey, I'm the big energy in this family. I'm the alpha male. I'm the leader of the pack. And it's a very strange way of being disempowered by the parent of an ego. And as children, we internalize that as, oh, I'm being too big, or if I let my bigness out, I'm going to hurt someone, or it's going to be too much. So we learn in a weird way, or we misunderstand, or we associate playing small as a gift of space for others, when in really playing small is withholding from the world the light that we came to shine for the evolution of every human being.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Very, very powerful. And speaking a little bit more about the perspective of a child, another thing that really jumped out was you were talking about stories and how you wouldn't tell a child to, that's hurting about something. If someone took their tricycle and they're crying, you wouldn't say, oh, that's just a story, drop it. And I thought that was really powerful and insightful too. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, it reminds me of a different teaching I did. Again, every day I download brand new teachings. I mean, I have so many teachings and not enough time to write the books that are flowing through me. So
right.
But I had a teaching that I did at a retreat I recently did. And I taught the 3 most unsuspecting ugly words. Like, there's a phrase containing 3 words that is not profanity, but it's the 3 words that have probably damaged a lot of us the most. And those 3 words are, get over it.
Right.
And just like when in your example, you wouldn't look at a child who was crying over the loss of their tricycle and say, oh, that's just your story. You're just in your ego. Oh, that's ephemeral. It comes and goes. You wouldn't try to use spirituality in that kind of dogmatic way, hopefully, when we're talking to a child. And for a lot of us, the words that have really stained our hearts the deepest is a phrase like, get over it. Or when we're with a parent who doesn't have the patience and tolerance to help us through our process. And when we're in a place of emotional weakness, and if they can't be the one that rescues us and shifts that feeling, it starts to make them feel incapable. So they say to us, get over it, because it's starting to make them feel inferior and insecure as a parent. And those words, along with things like, oh, honey, that's a story, all these disregarding phrases that, doesn't give a child the permission to say, you know what, your experience matters. The tricycle, as an adult, may seem ridiculous to me, but to you, it's your entire world. Right. And that type of empathy that a smart parent and a heart smart parent would show a child, that's the kind of relationship that we have to have with our own hearts. We have to actually be so sensitive to our experiences that we would talk to ourselves the way we talk to a child, and never disrespect the innocence of our heart that would try to say, get over it, or it's just a story. So just in the way that we would rise to the occasion to be so humble and so insightful and loving and patient with a child in pain, we have to ask ourselves, is that the way we're approaching a spiritual journey? Are we showing ourselves and others that much care and attention? And that's the kind of instinct that occurs when you're embodying the light of your soul. And of course, that only occurs through the process of opening your heart.
Yeah, beautiful. It's definitely one that you hear time and time again about, change the story. And you even go so far as to say, not only, give someone permission to be there. I think of my friend Chris Jackson, who always says permissionary. You become a permissionary.
I love that.
Isn't it good? And you have also a right to be frustrated and angry. Yes. And how this is something in the spiritual community that also where we're like, okay, I'm spiritually minded. Anger is not something that happens, or frustration. And it goes right along with this. Actually, you've pointed out in the video that I was watching, you were saying, well, actually, maybe this is how you're working through those energies. This is the path to overcome becoming frustrated or angry, is to actually experience it fully. And I think that is a really important point too, especially as someone who is very fiery, has lots of energy. And the upside of that is a lot happens. I get a lot done. The flip side of that can be agitation or frustration. And so, I think that's a really, really powerful point that you make.
Thank you. And I would totally agree, especially because if we were to look at a lot of, some of these old spiritual paradigms. And again, when I say old spiritual paradigms, it's not like it never should have existed. It's just we're now at a period of time where the textbooks need some drastic updating.
Right.
And so if we're going to talk about get over it, or, the catchphrase of let it go, or, all the things where people are basically confronted by a difficult emotional experience and they're going to try to bypass their way out of it or reframe it. Basically what we're saying to that experience is that there's no redeeming value for this experience, and that it is only manifested into time and space for me to throw it away. And of course, we know as we continue to awaken that everything has a specific purpose. It was never created by chance. It was created by a very smart and wise intelligence. And so if an intelligence has created everything, including ourselves, which we are that intelligence, then there must be a rather intelligent reason why these things are happening. And so could it possibly be that I'm only confronting the very difficult emotions to actually become aware of the experiences that I judge? And can I actually take the time to see that I might be brimming with spiritual insight and I might be a wise master on certain levels, but the real measurement of how much of a master we are is our relationship with our feelings. Are you allowing yourself to be frustrated when it arises? When you're frustrated, do you blame yourself for indiscretions of past lives, or do you wonder why the people in your life caused you to feel this way? Or do you say, wow, people can only remind me of the thing that's already inside of me, and thank you for triggering in me what gives me a chance to deepen my relationship with this feeling? I may not like frustration, I may not like anger, I may not like sadness, and I certainly may not like depression or loneliness or boredom. But can I see that every time life triggers it inside of me, it's a chance for me to have a more intimate and unconditionally loving relationship with those emotions? And that's an insight that we have once we begin to see that everything is here to help you.
Yeah. Yes. And, to go along with the idea of everything is here to help you, everything is, happening for you, not to you.
Right.
Faith. You talk a lot about being the mantra of the universe, and that is just like the way you just continue to bring it back to everything's always working out. I think you said in spite of all of us, in spite of these pitfalls, and I love that. It's so good.
Thank you. It's sometimes I phrase things in a way just to kind of make a drastic point. But when we talk about the universe is fueled by faith, what's the mantra of faith? The mantra of faith is, it is so. It is so is an affirmation that the highest truth that could only conspire in my highest favor and evolution is. I don't have to know why it is. I don't have to know what it is. I don't have to know where it is or when it is. I don't have to worry about those details. When we're an ego, we have to figure out and answer all those questions before we can say it is. When we are the light of the soul, all our job is to literally be the affirmer of faith. Our job is simply to say, it is so. And when you say it is so, life knows you're ready to be guided and shown what is. So our job is to say, it is so. I welcome my adventure, and whatever arises within me is only going to make me a better expression of my highest divine potential. And at that point, our surrender allows us to be guided into the unknown, into realities beyond our wildest imagination. When instead of trying to figure out when, why, where, and how it's so, our job is simply to step into the trajectory of faith by affirming it is so. And it's at that point where we stop trying to figure out the mystery and we become the mystery that we've been yearning to explore for so long.
And back to the video game, the idea of it being, we're in a simulation and we're here learning, the idea of it being a video game, that actually that is the end. That's how you win the game, is learning faith. And if it all worked,
Absolutely.
And if it all worked out for you, exactly the way you wanted it to work out, you're saying, hey, you wouldn't learn what the point of the game is. It's testing you to play the game properly. And just bringing that playfulness to it, I think is, it's like bringing levity to something that otherwise can seem so heavy. Like, oh, okay, this is how the game's played. Oh, okay. All right. This is happening so that I can learn faith. I know what's going on here. I think that really, really is a powerful thing to apply.
Oh, I totally agree. And just to kind of keep with the video game analogy, what if the object of the video game is not to have faith, and then if what you want turns out to be, then having faith in it and it manifesting means you won the video game? What if it's the realization that whether you actually get what you want or not, that would never have guaranteed your happiness? The real guarantee of happiness is taking the time to have faith in a force, an intelligence, and a love greater than your individual will. Again, that which is greater than your individual will happens to be the deepest truth of who you are, but we're here in these bodies playing this out, and we're going through a process of awakening. So what if it's not a matter of I had faith and I got what I wanted, so I won? The real winning is saying whether I get what I want or not, that thing that I desire is not guaranteed to make me happy at all. My true, abiding, permanent happiness comes from having faith in that which is greater, more loving and wise than my individual will, and just having that surrendered will in that force, no matter what comes or goes, is what allows us to abide in the triumph of true happiness.
Yeah. Basically, I'm going to enjoy the party before the party begins. And even if the party doesn't show up, to add to that, what you're just saying there, even if the party doesn't show up at all, I'm going to enjoy the ride. I'm just going to trust this process and quit swimming upstream, right? Absolutely.
If you get to Disneyland and the gates are closed, it's time to have a tailgate party.
Exactly. And you're going to make it in the end anyway. It can either be a miserable ride or you can float down the river. The choice is yours. Either way, it's going to take you.
Absolutely. And I think one of the greatest misunderstandings we still have as human beings, and again, this might sound overly simple, but it's amazing how the ego can discount an insight as being too simple. And yet it can be the one thing that eludes the ego every single day. I mean, the most interesting thing is to have so many spiritually aspiring beings who have absorbed such high level teachings, but then are eluded by the simplicity of the fundamental essential laws of the universe. And one of the fundamental essential laws of the universe is that you only desire the things that you think are the objects that when having them are going to make you feel the way you want to feel. And what we learn in our spiritual path is that it's wonderful to have amazing gifts, abundance, success, fame, fortune, even at whatever level, whether popular in your family or popular on YouTube. It's wonderful to have the validation of your partner and to be loved by your beloved. These are all wonderful things. But inherently, those are not the things that make you feel the way you want to feel. The way you want to feel is a direct result to how spiritually aligned and heart-centered you dare to become. So no matter how high level the teaching tends to be, what we realize, and again, on the spiritual journey, it gets a little convoluted because some people are wanting the object of money and fame and fortune and validation. And on the spiritual journey, we sometimes think that spiritual aspirations are not the same kind of object consciousness as wanting a car or a house or things like that. But it's the same kind of object. It's just more of a philosophical or existential object. Right. So when the things we're seeking are no longer guaranteed to give us the happiness and sustenance that we desire, we truly start to go inward and realize my true happiness and fulfillment is not based on what comes or goes, spiritually or otherwise, but actually how loving I am to myself and how aligned with my soul I happen to be. And of course, this is the basis and why I wrote Everything is Here to Help You, so that every spiritual being can go from ego to soul, but not from the ego's perspective, but in the most loving and heart-centered way, and to experience the true joy of emotional freedom and to experience the absolute capacity of what this life has to offer.
Yeah. Very, very well said. All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting this podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on the show Missing Links, the incredible researcher Greg Braden explores all the biggest questions concerning who we are, where we come from, where we're going, by connecting the missing links between science and spirituality to complete our understanding of humanity's history and to better understand the interconnectedness of all things. Awesome, right? And that's just one example. As you guys constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. You know, you touched on, the ego, and that's another thing, of course, we hear a lot about in the spiritual community. I like coming to all these, the big stories in the spiritual community and getting your unique perspective on some of it. So what is your take on the whole ego self? You hear some people saying, kill your ego. I personally feel it's something that needs to be integrated. It's like, it needs to be in its proper perspective and a healthy combination between your ego and soul. What is your thought on that?
Well, in the beginning of Everything Is Here to Help You, I make a really interesting point and talk about how the fundamental misunderstanding of most spiritual paths is that ego and soul do have two different names, but because they're labeled differently, they're assumed to be two different objects. And that what the ego is the soul during its early stages of development and incubation. Just as much as a child is an adult, under construction. A child is an adult in training. An adult, hopefully, is a fully mature, fully well-adjusted, and fully grown child. In the same way, an ego is just the incubation of that consciousness of the soul that is only being cocooned in human conditioning. So as it goes through its journey and awakens to its true potential, as the caterpillar dissolves and the butterfly is revealed, because we're also interconnected, your growth and your expansion is triggering growth and expansion within the cocoons of all beings. And so I think the fundamental oversight is, people are saying kill your ego or renounce your identity and, align with consciousness, as if they're two different things.
Right.
Instead of seeing that and you said it so well, integration, and I speak of integration of the ego quite often, is that the ego is something that gets integrated just like it's our inner child that gets healed in adulthood, hopefully. And so I obviously like to come from the most heart-centered and loving perspective, simply because I've had such an intense journey, and I'm so keenly aware of the intensity of other people's pain, that really it's the love that allows us all to open up and to allow the light of our soul to be embodied. It's the love that melts the edges of the ego. So, I'm not a real fan of these overly masculine type approaches, especially knowing that if you take a masculine approach to one level of realization, then you got to do the return flight and do the feminine. So if you're going to discard and if you're going to let go and push away and renounce, then the other side of it is facing, accepting, and embracing that which you've pushed away. So I like to teach a more integrated journey, a more complete journey. And I simply have found that when people learn how to be more loving with themselves, the conditioning melts so much quicker. And of course, if someone's interested in that kill the ego kind of mentality, what could only aspire to kill the ego but the ego itself? And so that's just the ego with a negative self-image, which is the worst pain in the world.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's insightful. It makes me think of something else I heard you say. Instead of working on yourself, love yourself. And
that's right.
That just lands like, we're spending so much time. I've got to fix myself. what if you just love yourself right where you're at and understand the journey is the goal? It's like the softness that instantly comes. And I do feel that's a big part of what's happening on our planet, Matt, with, a lot of the spiritual awakening, if you will, that's happening is, and I had someone point this out to me one time. They were saying, now you look at a lot of the males, there's a lot more feminine energies that are, because we all have both, right? And there seems to be a healthier balance. Whereas I think of my grandfather and literally, I don't know if you've ever seen City Slickers, that movie a long time ago with Jack Palance, like that. He looked like him. He acted like him. Like this guy didn't have an ounce of like feminine energy, or if it did, it had been like beat down deep. And, I feel like I'm pretty balanced. And, how do you feel like that's just sort of a natural thing that's happening? Would you agree with that? Or if someone maybe feels out of balance, how can they, bring out that feminine side of themselves to balance themselves out?
Well, I think the reason why we're seeing so much more feminine energy in men in particular, I mean, what we're seeing is the feminine energy arising in the masculine, right? And let that feminine energy, which is the energy of both consciousness and creative self-expression, to allow that to temper some of the edges of the masculine shadow. And equally so, we are seeing the feminine rise back into equal power so that the feminine doesn't have to be repressed and suppressed and dominated and all these interesting patterns that are going on. In fact, in the book, I remember writing about the integration of the masculine and feminine. And, as a channel, I sit there and just write what comes through me. And I couldn't even believe I spent like 20 minutes writing this thing on masculine and feminine, and I sat there with my jaw on the floor going, I don't know how I'm writing this. This is absolutely outrageous. And it gives me chills when I think about it. But at this time in history, the feminine is balancing out the masculine so that the masculine can become the conscious expression of masculine power. And at the same time, the feminine's are rising to heal the wounds in the feminine caused by some of the over-emasculated past experiences and atrocities. So we're living in a time where the masculine and feminine are kind of balancing themselves out. So if we find ourselves wanting to be more in our feminine, and like I said, some people would hear that and go, no, I'm the masculine, not the feminine.
Right. Have you seen my muscles?
Dude, I'm ripped.
Look at my biceps.
Exactly. Who needs feminine energy when you're shredded? But, and as a former bodybuilder many years ago, I could say that it's such an ironic thing for me to say that. But really, the balancing out, the balancing out is that the feminine energy is both consciousness, which is our spiritual aspect, and creativity, which is our inner artist aspect. So really what we're looking at is we balance out by being more spiritually receptive. And so what does it mean to be more spiritually receptive? It means no matter how I or anyone else is acting, I inherently respect that every being is an expression of divinity. And whether they're acting the way I want them to or not, I honor and respect that maybe they're going through a deep healing journey to the likes that I or they may not even know is occurring. So really, spiritual alignment is a propensity to respect the greater intelligence within a human being, whether running the show or stuffed way in the background. And the inner artist is just the ability to have some space in our life to creatively express ourselves. Like for me, my creative expression is, aside from writing, is cooking. And so I go to the store, I don't follow recipes. I just buy ingredients that resonate with me. And then I go home and I solve the puzzle and I make meals out of ingredients and I make magic. And that for me is my creative expression, my creative outlet. For some people, it might be writing in a journal. It might be, making jewelry. It might be dancing. It might be singing. But I think what's important as spiritual beings is when we get really entrenched in spiritual evolution, which is a beautiful thing, of course. I've dedicated my entire life to it. But when you are spiritually evolving, the deeper you go or the higher you go in consciousness, the more important it is to balance that spiritual expansion with some real world personal self-expression.
Yeah.
I made a joke at a retreat I was leading, and I said, never trust a teacher who isn't an artist. And I was joking, but I kind of wasn't. Because the truth is if you are a spiritual being who's not equally willing to be in your body and pick up some crayons with your child and doodle, or just on a sketch pad, just have the ability to take what is within you and manifest it into tangible form without judging yourself, that's what we need to be really well-adjusted, balanced human beings.
Yeah.
We have to wake up. We have to grow up. And equally, as we are spiritually expanded, we have to learn to be self-expressive. And so really, it's just learning how to balance out the polarity so we can be the fullness of who we were born to become.
Yeah, I think of people sometimes who will say, oh, well, yeah, I'm not creative. And I instantly think, hold on, what are we at our core? We are one with the source that creates and animates all things. What does it do again? It creates. That's the creator. We are the creator and created rolled into one. Like that's when I feel and believe that we're the most fulfilled, is when we are stepping into that creator role. And for, a lot of people, it's been suppressed, and they've been told that they're no good at drawing. When they were 7 years old, they brought that picture to the mean uncle or whatever who said, oh, this sucks. What happened in that moment? It's now repressed and still there. It's, whether it may not be drawing. The uncle may be right. Maybe drawing wasn't your thing, but it could be cooking. It could be, and really anytime you're expressing with joy, it doesn't really matter the outcome or what it looks like from a judgmental standpoint. It's like, it's the joy of doing it. And I personally feel you're spot on with that everyone should look at, if you're not having some sort of creative outlet in your life, how can I tap into that part of myself that is really resonating with higher self?
Absolutely. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with someone. And it was just, I said something quite ironic. And it's funny how the simplest things you can say can spontaneously wake someone up out of a belief. And they said to me, I'm not creative. And I said, but isn't that in and of itself the most creative belief?
Yeah, that's extremely creative. The irony is thick.
Right. And so the irony is we are creative beings, but most of us are using all of our creativity against ourselves, which, if you're using your creativity against yourself, you're someone saying to yourself, I'm not creative.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is if we look at like music, for example, I'm a huge music fan. I love music of all genres, of all styles. When I work out and listen to heavy metal and all sorts of stuff.
I love it all.
So you think of someone like, for example, Mariah Carey, right? Mariah Carey's got an amazingly melodic voice. She hits a lot of octaves. It's amazing. You think of someone like Bob Dylan, who's, I don't know if it's about octaves and range. It's more about, just the storytelling and the emotion in the tone of his voice. Yeah. And I think what the misunderstanding is that creatively speaking, people are trying too hard to be accurate and not allowing themselves to be emotive. Yeah. Yeah. Like you listen to Bob Dylan and you don't go, oh my God, did you hear that harmony? Did you hear that? Right. The whole charm of the whole charm is the opposite. It's the crackly, weathered, real, down to earth, you can feel how sincere it is. Absolutely. And that's really the role of an artist. The role of an artist is to be more honest and more emotive than the audience. And by bleeding on stage, the audience gives permission to tune into their repressed pain and to take the time to feel what they've stuffed away and suppressed. So the musician or the artist is really truly a healer who just uses universal harmonics and melodies to help people come to terms with the things they've been avoiding. Yeah. So when we think about our life's purpose, whether it's a spiritual role, a music role, or performance role, or just being a parent or whatever it is, instead of trying to be so perfect, instead of trying to be accurate, let's just be emotive. Let's just be receptive. Let's just be real. Let's not try to be too much like something we've seen. Let's not try to prove ourselves or overcompensate for the things in the past. Let's just be authentic. Let's just be emotive. And let's let the inner artist weave this tapestry of art throughout our lives, it doesn't have to sound pretty. It doesn't have to look incredible. It just has to be the most honest thing that wants to be birthed through you.
Yeah, that's powerful. And being vulnerable to do that, to be willing to put yourself out there is, if you see someone being vulnerable in any way, it's hard not to. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone, when someone's being vulnerable, not all of a sudden have their heart cracked open, right?
Absolutely. In fact, when I'm on stage, my intention, even though I'm letting it flow and I usually don't have an idea, I'm just going to talk and it's going to happen. My intention is twofold. And I always think about this when I go on stage. Everyone has a different intention. And sometimes people, I remember in the beginning of my career, it was always like, let me bring through the highest teaching from the kabillionth dimension. And, I've grown so much in my journey, and now my intention is twofold. And my intention is, may I convey the most beautiful teaching, and may I be more vulnerable than anyone who's attending this. Because if I can be more vulnerable, and it happens to be that vulnerability is one of my deepest strengths, and I live in an eternal state of vulnerability. I don't, I'm not living in a place where I'm always hurt, because as it turns out, always being hurt is because we're not fully committing to being vulnerable. Because if you're so vulnerable and always willing to be broken open, at a certain point, there's nothing to shut down to further break open in the future. There's just openness. So we're only broken open by life for the opportunity to remain open. And if we can live in a naturally open space, which happens through the process of awakening, we walk into a moment more vulnerable than anyone else around us. And that's when we become their liberators and transformers instead of their future victims.
That's when you step into the role of the permissionary, right?
That's right.
Now, one of the things that you talk about in your new book that is a big one, dealing with the villains in our story, enemies, and how we can see them as spiritual allies. And, you also say, of course, forgiveness is easier said than done, but there's ways that you can do this more easily. And, I instantly think of a scenario in my own life with past business partners. And, it's something that I feel like I've moved into a state of forgiveness and understanding, that they're playing a story. Whereas my brother, who went through the same thing as my business partner, still really harbors a lot of pain and anger over it. And I'm always looking for creative ways to get him to see, you're drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. How can we see our enemies as spiritual allies?
Well, let's take this idea of forgiveness, which this is a point I make in the book, is that, and I love always taking a teaching and figuring out a new way of teaching it. So what I find to be disempowering about the typical understanding of forgiveness is that you're turning towards the person who has done something unconscionable to you. And of course, through the eyes of compassion, they're living in a state of ego. They're not in their full consciousness. They probably didn't mean to hurt you. Of course, we all know that at a high level, but, we have to really honor our personal experience and not bypass it. And so part of the issue is when people forgive, they're turning towards the people that have done this to them. And they're on some level saying, I'm willing to think it's okay that what happened to me so that I can spare myself a future pain, which in and of itself is a very subtle but very obvious bypass. So how I like to teach forgiveness is that forgiveness is accepting the terms and conditions of your experience. Meaning, like you were saying in your example, you were betrayed by a former business partner. And just to use this as an example, what would be the emotion that you would say is associated to that betrayal? How does that feel in your body?
It feels the emotion that anger, there's anger and sadness. It's sort of a cocktail of different things.
Sure.
Yeah, anger and sadness would be the first two that come up.
So if we worked with that, so forgiveness is pardoning the character who brought your attention to the anger and sadness within you. So what if we were to kind of just, with imaginary scissors, let's just cut away the character who represents this betrayal. Let's even cut away betrayal. let's just say this person in this situation brought my attention to the sadness and anger that was somehow within me. And now it's here for me to resolve. And my question to you is, what's the nature of sadness and anger when we're just facing what was already within us and we're no longer associating it to the past experience or that character?
What is the nature of it when it's just on its own?
Yeah, sadness and anger by itself, not associated to the incident and to the person, just that feeling. Does that change at all?
Yeah, well, it does, because now you sort of own it instead of it, I guess, being put on you. It's something that you have to look at and say, well, if there's no other story attached to it, then it's mine. And which instantly makes me think, well, why am I carrying this?
Exactly. And so the ability for you to say, this person just reminded me of the feelings that were already within me, by pardoning the character and pardoning the situation and just dealing with the emotion and your relationship with that emotion, that pardoning is the act of forgiveness. So forgiveness means I no longer associate my emotions, my pain, and my experiences with the environments, circumstances, and people that appear to trigger it.
Right. Wow.
Very powerful.
Yeah, that, very, very powerful. So then, what would you say? Okay, so now someone gets to that point. They're there and they've pardoned the people surrounding it. Now they realize it's something that was just triggered or brought up within themselves. Right. But yet I still feel this, Matt. What do I do?
It's a great question. So now we're dealing with just sadness and anger or any variety of emotion. When we are experiencing, like, for example, anger, when, in the book, Everything is Here to Help You, I explain the positive ways in which everything is trying to help us by seeing it all from the soul's perspective. So what does sadness represent on the highest evolutionary benefit? Sadness, often called depression, is the recognition that you are processing so much emotional pain in your healing journey that what you really need to do is take more time to be with yourself, get more rest, and make self-care your focus. Kind of like if you and your child, when you were sick one day as a child, or if your child needs to stay home from school, your job is to take care of that child and help them, get better and rehabilitate. In the same way, emotional sadness says, despite all the things that call to your attention, you have so much emotional density right now that taking care of yourself on the highest level is really going to progress your healing journey, because there's a lot of things being healed at the moment. So sadness reminds us when we need to become our highest emotional priority. And anger is almost like a guard. And when anger arises within ourselves or from another person, anger is saying, I'm not aware of how much healing is really going on right now, and my anger is letting me know that I need more space for myself and space from other people, so I have the space to really be with what's healing inside of me to make my emotional healing a greater priority. So whether it's sadness reminding us to take better care of ourselves and to just be gentle with the deep healing process underway, or anger reminding us who needs space to be with themselves and process what's being released, either way, anger and sadness are always giving us a positive message from the light of our soul that's always telling us exactly what we need if we learn to listen with an open heart.
Beautiful, beautiful. Very, very, very powerful. And I'm looking here and I can't believe we've already, we're getting to the end already. It feels like it just began. There's so much juicy content and so many wonderful perspectives that you've shared. One last question, I have a couple questions here for you, and as we wrap this up, but one is, you talk about in the book also, accomplishing emotional freedom. Does this tie into what you were just saying with anger and sadness? How can we accomplish true emotional freedom?
Absolutely. Emotional freedom is real. It's an experience that I've had for over 15 years, along with living in a meditative state called samadhi. It's real, but it's misunderstood. Emotional freedom doesn't mean you don't feel emotions. Emotional freedom means when emotions arise, my relationship with the sensations of emotions, whether as positive emotions of joy or negative emotions of grief or sadness or pain or loss, that whatever emotion arises, emotional freedom is the reflection of how unconditionally loving my relationship is with my feelings. Meaning, when we are emotionally free, every feeling is an ally. Every feeling is a helper. Every feeling is a message. Every feeling is guidance, just telling us and helping us understand how to take better care of ourselves. Emotions are just like the many side mirrors and rear view mirrors that we have in our cars that help us to avoid getting caught in blind spots. So when we are emotionally free, we are using all of our soul's highest tools and attributes for our evolutionary benefit and not thinking that anything's conspiring against us. So emotional freedom is really the relationship we have with our feelings, not whether or not we have feelings.
Love that so much. As I mentioned at the top, I always like to ask a story of synchronicity, serendipity, a positive paranormal story. But as you sort of told your background story, it definitely had a paranormal element to it. Do you have any other? So I will technically let you off the hook because you tied in a great story there. But if you have any others that you care to share as we're wrapping up here, I love. I'm such a sucker for a good story like that. And if you have any others, would love to hear them.
Absolutely. I mean, I experience synchronicities and serendipities literally on a daily basis, and every time it happens, it's always like the first time it occurred. It's always like, oh my God, how is this even happening?
I know.
So I was in traffic today. I'll give you the most recent. I was in traffic today, and I was thinking about my book launch, and my book is still in the pre-order phase where people can pre-order the book, and already the book in many categories on Amazon is a #1 bestseller. And
wow,
I'm just
congrats.
sitting in the car. Thank you. I'm just, the pre-order campaign started like less than a couple weeks ago, and this is already happening. So I'm just sitting in gratitude and saying, thank you for all of this success, and thank you, universe, for choosing me to write this book through. And in front of me in a car, the license plate was 555. Now, the universe always speaks to me in numbers. 555 is an angel number that represents prepare for major miraculous change coming your way. And as I saw that, the car coming from the other lane, in opposing traffic towards me, its license plate was 555.
Wow.
And so, and then I went, oh my God, it like intersected at the same moment. Like it was, six fives in a row, which is like, multiplying that message in such a profound way. And then I drove around the block to find a parking space and went into the coffee shop, got my latte, backed out of the car, and I was going to drive out of the driveway, and there was a car coming, so I let it pass. And the car that passed me was the same exact car that was in front of me 10 minutes ago, and it was 555 once again.
Wow. And I would say the ultimate moral of the story is buckle up your seatbelt, Matt Kahn, because this is just the beginning of your miraculous ride to self-healing and being a conduit for, others to raise their consciousness. And I so applaud your work and appreciate you. What is the best way for people who want to follow your work to connect?
Well, and by the way, thank you for saying that. I received that, and then I'm so grateful for all of what is happening. The true humility comes from humble beginnings, and I will never forget where I've come from, and I'm always grateful for each and everything that comes my way. It is truly a joy for me to serve the evolution of every heart. My brand new website is mattkahn.org. That's MATTKAHN.org. And right now at mattkahn.org, you can pre-order my book, Everything is Here to Help You. And when you do so, you get a lot of incredible bonuses that Hay House has put together. And very soon that website will be launched, and you can sign up for my free newsletter. You can like me on Facebook. You can follow me on YouTube if you just type in my name, Matt Kahn. And this is just a really exciting time to unite all light workers and heart-centered beings, and really what I call the love revolution, which is just a global movement of unconditional love. We are really stepping out of the shadows of inferiority. We're really stepping into the light, and we're really stepping out together so we can all support each other and shining as never before. So if you are ready to experience the deepest, most profound love, and you're ready to be a part of a global love movement, I invite you to go to mattkahn.org, pre-order Everything Is Here to Help You, and join in the fun that we are all creating together. I mean, this is where everything really becomes so much fun, and it's so incredible to help be a part of leading a movement that allows us to be heart-centered and loving, just as we are spiritually aware and wise.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And just to add to that, there's, as you guys have heard me talk about, there's some really great videos on YouTube of Matt, some of Matt's teachings. And they're just, as you can see from this podcast, I mean, they're just packed with, they're just dense with insights and just powerful realizations. So I would encourage that as well. And I do have, Matt, one last question I'd like to leave you with. My predictable ending question. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Matt Kahn?
The meaning of life is the willingness to love as if you don't have another breath in your body. To give as you've never give, to receive as you've never received, and to give to this moment as if when it's done, you're riding the escalator up to heaven and you're going to call it a day. The meaning of life is to give it all to love and to allow life to give all that love back to you.
So beautifully said. What a wonderful note to end this on. Matt, you are an inspiration, my friend. Thank you so much for being. And I look forward to connecting with you in 3D at some point. And until then, journey well, my friend.
Thanks, brother. Many blessings.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download from our hearts and minds to yours, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes, since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting. Your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.